One of the things that's been a struggle for me in my life at times has been the question of, well, what do I really have to offer the world? And we look at other people in leadership and other people with giftings that are so much better than we have, and they seem to be so much more gifted and successful, and they seem to be able to make a huge impact on the lives of people around them. And when we try to add ourselves up against that, we go, well, they're here and I'm way down here and I can never attain that. And it's interesting, the other day I was spending a little time reading from the story of Esther, the book of Esther in the Bible, which is about a Jewish woman who was basically spent her life in exile in another country, not in the land of Israel, in the land of Persia. So she was in exile. She was a person in exile. She was a woman in a very, very male dominated society. And she rose to be the number two person in the kingdom, as it were, and that she became the wife, the queen in the known power at that time, the Persian Empire. And as we look at that story, what we find is that God was behind the whole thing, and it wasn't really about what she brought to the table. Now, here's what we know: we know that she was um, Jewish, and we know that she was very beautiful. The text itself basically says that she had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. It also tells us that when the king was trying to find his new queen, because he banished the other one because that other queen had made him frustrated and angry, that women were gathered together in Susa, which was the city that the Persian king lived in. They were gathered together, and basically Esther was taken. So she didn't really even have a choice in this. It was like, yeah, she looks pretty good, bring her in. And so we can see this male dominated society type of thing where she's not able to um, even make her own choices as far as this is concerned. And so she's put into the custody of Haggai, who is basically in charge of all of the women, the king's women, as it were, the concubines, and so on and so forth. And what we find is that she's given cosmetics and a special diet, and and she's chosen to be, I guess, part of the harem of the king. And ultimately, the king's going to choose one of them to be his queen. Um, and if you're a woman listening to me say this right now, you're going, "Well, this is a terrible story," and I agree. You know what? There's no way that women should be treated this way. It's wrong. And yet, what I want to show you from the story, everyone who's listening to this right now, is that God works through things in bizarre ways at times. And in this particular story, this woman, Esther, not by her own laurels and her own giftings and stuff, comes to this place where she rises above anyone else in the kingdom other than the king himself. Um, Let me just read a portion of the scripture to you. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go to King Xerxes after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women, when the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. Now, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of all the women, advised. Now, Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to the king into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that the royal crown was put on her head, and she was made queen instead of Vashti, who was the former queen. And then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants, and it was Esther's feast. So this is kind of an interesting thing. She's a beautiful woman, and she goes through all this beautifying stuff, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. And then the king has to make a choice. What I want you to see, though, is that she was winning favor with everyone, not just the king, but the king's eunuch and anyone who saw her. And I want to suggest to you that's not really about the beauty here. It's about something else that was going on. See, she brought all sorts to the table. But what's going on behind all of this is that God had given her influence. Now, why is that so important? It's so important because if we feel like we are all that in a bag of chips and that's what makes us who we are, we're wrong. Anything that we are able to contribute to blessing other people and loving other people is a gift from God. And when we don't have anything to give, you know what? Ask God for influence. Don't ask God for money. Don't ask God for power. Don't ask God for anything else that you think might get you there. Ask God for influence. Because when God makes you a person of influence, he can change things and he can make incredible things happen. In the case of our friend Esther here, she ended up saving the people of Israel. See, there's this other guy in the Persian kingdom who was actually the number two guy as far as having power in the kingdom. His name was Haman, and he hated the Jews. And of course, in all of this, Esther never told the king that she was Jewish, but Haman has this plot to sort of bring down all the Jews. In fact, he convinces the king to basically put out a proclamation, a declaration that on a such and such a day, anybody in the kingdom could go out and kill a Jew and take all of his stuff. It's just terrible, hateful stuff. And so funny, through this whole situation, God gives Esther influence in such a way that she is able to win the heart of the king to the point where the king goes, Esther, whatever you ask from me, up to half of my kingdom, I'll give it to you. And Esther says, well, I'd like you to save my people. And it's at that point that she reveals that she is Jewish. And as a result, the king puts out another proclamation that allows the Jewish people to defend themselves. And the Jews were not destroyed. You see, it wasn't beauty, it wasn't power, it wasn't money, it wasn't wealth that won the day. It was the influence that God gave Esther in the palace, amongst the staff, and with the king that changed everything. So what I put before you today is, are you going after the right things in order to make a difference? The right things being just one thing. Are you asking God for influence? Or are you still going after money, wealth, power? All of these things that ultimately will not change things. The thing that changes hearts is a person who influences them. Today, if you don't think you have anything to give, ask God to give you influence. I guarantee he will give it to you. And you will find that you are able to change people's lives and bring people into a place of peace and well-being that they've never experienced before, because God will work through the favor and the influence that he gives you. Have a good day, guys. Thanks.